your network is your net worth. So while I hate how played out that phrase is, it's absolutely true. I'll give you a quick story about like how true that is for me. If I look back at like the most recent acquisitions that I've made, they're all directly correlated to the people that I have found in my circle. So the mobile home parks, I personally didn't find those deals on my own. Properties that I have 39 properties in Ohio. The acquisition of those properties I did with a partner. That partner I found, like each one of these different assets that I've grown inside of the portfolio that I have, really all can stem back to the importance of your network. So the next story is about how I met my business partner that I now have 39 properties in Ohio with. So I was at a mortgage conference. On my flight down, I ended up losing my luggage. So I checked the bag, luggage gets lost, and now I'm at this conference in Vegas with nothing more than a pair of flip-flops, shorts, and a t-shirt that I had because everything else was in my check bag that got lost. Initially, my initial reaction was that of like frustration and everything else you can imagine. But over time, and as I got in there, I realized like, okay, I got to turn this thing around and make this work for the best. So what I did was every time I met somebody new at the conference, which again is typical, you're introducing yourself to all sorts of new people, instead of the typical process of, hey, how are you? Pretty good. How are you? Good. That's it. It was, hey, how are you? Somebody asked me how I was, and I said, good, except for the fact that the plane lost my luggage, so I'm here with absolutely nothing, which then created some curiosity, and then they wanted to know the story and how it worked and what happened. And so that negative situation of losing my luggage actually allowed me to have more in-depth conversations with all sorts of people because everybody's curious as to what I was going to do and what happened, and they wanted to hear the story. So as that took place, I ended up meeting more and more people that I probably never would have met. And through some of those connections, I end up having dinner with a group of people, two of which were a husband and wife that owned a mortgage company in Southern California. We all hit it off great. And fast forward a year and a half later, and we've bought almost 40 properties in Ohio together, still actively looking at buying more property out there. And I would say if I traced it all the way back, it came from having a bad situation happen, not letting that be the end all, and then turning it into a talking point that I use to meet all sorts of great people. So here are the three things that I've done to get into high value circles. Number one, you need to be interesting. Being interesting can mean a couple of different things, but the first could be have interesting stories. People like to hear stories. They talk about different stories and experiences that they have. And so having some interesting life experiences is typically captivating to a lot of people. The more interesting that you can be from experiences that you've had, risks that you've taken, challenges that you've overcome, you got to be kind of vulnerable in some of those situations because some of the biggest risks that people overcome or the biggest challenges that they've overcome start with them being in a situation that they weren't happy with. And so you've got to be willing to talk about that to then talk about the mountain that you were able to climb. So I would say being interesting and having some interesting information to provide is critical. So if you're trying to create some opportunities, some interesting stories, there's one thing that I have done in my past, which is if I'm looking at, let's say I'm at this position where it's kind of fork in the road and I could do X or I could do Y. If Y is going to provide for a much better story, I'm picking Y almost every time, to a fault sometimes. And so by doing that, you're going to get yourself into some interesting situations that will also create some very interesting stories. Next one, number two, you need to be confident. The key to confidence is not necessarily what you say, how you say it. That confidence ultimately comes from the internal belief in your own value. And so I think that if you can understand how much value you provide to those around you, then having that belief in your own value translates directly into having what people call confidence. So really understand your own individual value. And then once you have that, you hold that, then that translates into what everybody around you will call confident. It really is just having the belief in the value that you provide. Find your value, really understand your own individual value. And then once you have that, you hold that, then that translates into what everybody around you will call confidence. But really, it's just an understanding of the value that you possess. So understand your value. And that'll lead to confidence. So that leads me right into the third thing that you need to do is you have to bring value. Bringing value can come in a handful of different forms. Let's say you've got a ton of experience in finding and acquiring deals and opportunities. And so if you're really good at, well, then that's value that you can present and provide to other people in that circle. The other thing that I would say is that there are plenty of other circles that you can get into that you might only be in for a single day or a single event. If there was a situation where Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, if all of those people were in the same room and I could enter that circle, that's like wildly valuable, because I'm going to sponge as much information as I can, and then I'm going to take that value back into other circles that I'm in that I can kind of barter and trade with in these other circles. So bring value. There have been a couple of circles that I've got into that the people were doing like far greater business than I was, but a joke goes a long way as long as it hits well. But you can provide some humor, and then that allows you to almost kind of get into the circle. And then at that point, just sponge as much as you possibly can while you're in that environment. So those of you out there, use those 3 steps of being more interesting, being more confident, providing more value to enter different circles. And once you're there, I guarantee you're going to be able to receive a ton of value. And who knows, maybe you'll end up finding a partner that you'll buy a bunch of properties in Ohio with.